Welcome back to The Big Picture. My guest is Karyn Reece. We're talking about all things parapsychology, the afterlife, and talking to people who've crossed over. We're talking to whether or not we know what's going on the other side. Being reassured that there is another side, that our life here on this earth is not all that there is. And, I think everybody wants to know that. They want to be reassured that their loved ones who've passed on are still around, that they're doing well, and that it hasn't ended. And I think that's why, shameless plug, Karyn has a show here on WBBZ. It's on Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. If any of this sounds familiar, that's the reason you can tune in. And it's a fascinating show. And Karyn does readings. We have a live audience, which you can be part of. And we shoot the show on a regular basis. Go to WBBZ-TV and you get all the information as to when we shoot. And it's a worthwhile experience. Anyway, so getting back to, I think in terms of abilities, when I was taking the course in college, one of the things that we talked about was that everybody really has this ability. Mm-hmm. But as a child, we're taught that all the other things in this world are what count, and our abilities are something that we should ignore. It's the imaginary friends and the imagination and whatever. That's really something that you kind of outgrow. You can't really pay attention to that. You got to do your schoolwork. You got to you take out the garbage. You got to do your chores and all the mechanics of living take over, and you unlearn any abilities that you normally have. And that's basically what we've learned, in the course that I took. And I think there's something to that.
It's funny because some of the most successful people, whether it's business or medicine or whatever, tend to use their intuition. And intuition is nothing more than just a basic line of psychic. So it's funny where, on the one hand, we're very driven by our left brain, very linear, very analytical, and how we look at the world, with our six senses. But at the same time, people say, I've used my intuition, but I don't believe in psychic, which is sort of funny, actually, quite frankly. But it always has that underpinning. And it's kind of interesting too, because people are taught in society. And you hear a lot of younger kids saying, oh, my invisible friend, up until about the age of 3, when they really do see people from the other side. And then of course we ground them. What an unfortunate thing, because you really could, do quite a bit. I know when I used to do job interviews, I used to use my psychic. Thinking, oh, this person's getting more money than me. I got to hit them up for more, cash. So you can use it in a very applicable way, I guess.
When I was first starting out in news, many, many years ago, I did a story on a course that was called the Silva Mind Control course. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Oh, I know all about that.
But I took the course as part of the story, and it was a whole week where you learned how to basically relax, go into a state of relaxation where you could concentrate your psychic abilities, if you will. In this state of concentration, you could basically reach into your abilities. And at the end of the course, after you've practiced getting into this relaxed state, we did an exercise on the final day of the class where you sat across from somebody, they mentioned a name, and you were supposed to talk about the person that they were thinking about. And you would talk about who that person was, how old they were, whether they were sick or whatever. And it was amazing, because on that particular day, there were like maybe 10 or 12 people that I was sitting across from, and they mentioned these names. And out of those 10 people, 8 of them, I got the person that and all they did was mention the name, and I got a specific description of each of those people, including like this one little old lady that I was describing. I said her arm hurt. I described the kind of dress she wore and who she was and so on. And when I opened my eyes, the guy sitting across me said, you know what, this is my grandmother, and you described her to a T, except that you know, it wasn't her right arm, you know, she had a stroke and it's her left arm that was paralyzed. And I said, well, okay, you know, at least it's pretty close. He came back to me 15 minutes later and he said, you know, I was talking to my wife and it was her right arm, not her left arm. You got it right. And the whole day was like that. And it really kind of impressed me as to what was possible. And it wasn't just me, the whole class had success like this. It was unbelievable, and it really impressed me as to what was possible. It really was.
It's pretty exciting. I know, like Dr. Moody has done quite a bit on past lives and information, you know, relative to this as well as other people. But it's kind of funny when you think about how you can actually tune in just by paying attention, and you prove to yourself that, you know, you had one arm and the gentleman disagreed, but there was that connection. The fact that you even got that connection in the first place, how would you know that? You know, just goes into that whole point. You know, there's something beyond our normal six senses that you can't necessarily explain logically. Although nowadays we've got cameras showing ghosts on camera, we have video recordings, audio recordings, you know, all sorts of, you know, ways of picking up that vibration or that energy.
Do you think there will ever be any concrete proof? I mean, we have people that have basically been clinically dead and they come back and they describe an experience. And so, you know, there's a lot of descriptions that agree, you know, as to what people go through. But there's really no proof. I mean, you've got these testimonies, you know, from people. And like you say, we've got kind of fuzzy pictures now of apparitions and you know, sound recordings maybe of people from the other side talking, but it's kind of fuzzy. Where do you think that's going to go? Do you think that'll ever be more proof?
I do. I think with the way technology continues to evolve, I think we'll eventually be able to really pick up and harness like voices coming in on audio or our better photography. Also with people that pass over too, coming back and telling, you know, loved ones or people, you know, their experiences or things that they didn't know. Like there was something recently where a little boy had mentioned to his mom and dad he had had a near death, that he had a brother. He had no idea that his parents had lost a child before him because they never discussed it. So, you know, those are some proof positives. And again, with technology, I'm excited because I believe that, you know, eventually you'll see even harder core evidence. You know, and there is some really great material out there. And I know from my own experience, I've sat in my office where I've had a door open and close, you know, and just strange things, and I'll see like a little one walking in. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, I had an experience once, you know, I was in a helicopter crash. And I don't talk about it very often. It's not something, you know, that I don't like talking about. It's just that it never really comes up, and I don't have occasion to talk about it very often. But after the crash, I spent, I can't even remember, I think it was like 6 weeks in the hospital, and I was in a wheelchair for like 3 years. And so it was a pretty brutal crash. And when I woke up in a hospital, you know, I was on drugs for pain, and I was kind of out of it. I wasn't sure whether I was alive or dead, and I went through some experiences, and the things that occurred to me, conversations that I had with relatives that had passed on, you don't know. I mean, it's so vague. It's there, and you think you're experiencing it, but then you think back and you say, did I imagine that, or was it real? It seems real at the time, and you can think back and you remember it very specifically. It's a fascinating experience, and having gone through it, I'm convinced that, you know, what I experienced was real, but it's hard to describe. Really very difficult to describe.
That's a great point, and I tell people if you want to determine whether or not you've had a experience out of body or near death, or you've connected with your loved ones, say in your dream state, it's the emotional connection you have. Because typically speaking, if it's imaginary, you're not going to be emotional about it. But if you come out saying, I really felt like they were there, I felt that emotion, that love or whatever, then you know that you've really connected with them. And by the way, on the other side, people don't realize that yes, you have a house, yes, you look at your past lives, there's even Vegas. I mean, all the nice things that we have here actually originates on the other side. And many of our scientists in the underground know about the other side too. They would get a lot of their inspiration, Einstein, Thomas Edison, you know, they would intuit a lot of their things, Mozart. and have success with whatever applications they were working on. Now, if you go to the other side, it might be a little hotter and different, and there's not just one heaven or one hell. There's all different levels above and below. Just thought I'd throw that in.
Well, see, in all the reading I've done, and when I was out in Hollywood, I tried my hand at writing a little bit, and I came up with, from all my experiences, I came up with kind of a combining science with what we're talking about. Science tells us that there's more than the dimensions that we experience, you know, the physical dimensions. They you know, scientists believe that there may be as many as 9 different dimensions. And if that is the case, then the dimensions that exist could be totally foreign to what we know as the physical dimension. And who's to say that if you pass on from this dimension, this life, you don't inhabit some or all of the other dimensions? And if you pass on from this life, you have the freedom to wander throughout the universe in many other existing dimensions. Maybe you don't want to come back here. Maybe that's the explanation for why people don't come back here and visit us, because they're too busy exploring everything else.
Or it might be taxes again, right?
Maybe the Cuomos are chasing people through the other dimensions.
Well, you got quantum physics, which is what you're alluding to as well, where they'll take apples and they'll transport the apple from one place to another place. So you got a lot of interesting, which isn't, you know, out there broadly, but people know in the underground, you know, you've got all sorts of crazy things, scientific things going on that do show and, you know, point to other dimensions.
I wrote a Star Trek episode once that was, they liked it, but they never bought it. And it was basically that there was an interaction between this dimension and a totally opposite dimension, which was the physical dimension here translated to an energy dimension there. Everything on the other side was energy, just like lightning here was the physical on the other side. And so the physical here would have been the equivalent of lightning, you know, and so they didn't mix. It was like going over to the other side. If you touched somebody, it was like lightning touching somebody here, and it was a very interesting episode. But
interesting, because you were actually onto something, because physicians have actually measured people the minute they die, their bodies are like 3 ounces lighter. And there's no loss of blood or anything. So what actually is it? And some people have seen like little poofs of energy. So.
Well, and you know, if you ever heard of Kirlian Photography?
Yes, I've had it done.
You can basically take a picture of somebody's hand or a leaf or, you know, anything that's living, and there's a kind of an aura that's around that living thing. It comes on photography. It comes across as a light that radiates from the living tissue. And if you kind of think about it, the pictures that were drawn of deity, of like Jesus and the saints in the past, the halos that are pictured over the heads of the holy people, it almost has a similar feel to it.
You're dead on, no pun intended.
Well, you know, there's so much, you know, to think about with this, and it's a fascinating subject, and people really, they don't have a lot of time to think about this, but it is something that fascinates everyone, and as it should. It really should. You know, we live each day, again, with the mechanics of living. We have to get by, we have to pay the bills, we have to do the chores, but we should take a moment to think about the good things in life, to smile and enjoy each other, and maybe think about some of the things that, you know, can fascinate us and get us to use our imaginations. And I think, you know, that's, you know, worth a moment or two every day. And it's also worth tuning in to the, you know, the Karyn Reece show on Fridays and on Mondays at 8 o'clock here on WBBZ.
No deadbeats for us, right? They always show up. Dad never stiffy on our show.
Yeah. How much time do we have? Well, we're about out of time right now. So Thanks to Karyn Reece for being my guest on The Big Picture. Thanks to all of you for watching The Big Picture this week, and thanks so much for watching WBBZ-TV. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on The Big Picture.